Hello, I'm Scott Grzyzbowski, Senior Specialist Solution Architect in our Cloud Infrastructure and Security team here at Databricks. I'm going to walk you through enabling firewall support for your Azure Workspace storage account. What is it and why do we need it? By default, the Azure storage account for your workspace accepts authenticated connections from all networks. For many of our regulated industry customers, this is an issue that has to be addressed. With our new feature that has been generally available since May 1st of this year, 2024, you can limit access by enabling this firewall support, which means no more public network access. So before we jump into the details, let's take a look at some of the prerequisites. Your workspace must enable VNet injection, right? Bring your own VNet for this workspace that we're going to be enabling this feature for today. Your workspace must enable secure cluster connectivity, SCC, or no public IP or NPIP. A lot of acronyms there. Your workspace must be on a premium plan, and you must have a separate subnet for the private endpoints for the storage account. We're going to go through and verify all this in my existing workspace in just a minute. I also list a few additional resources that you could use. One, we're going to be looking at the documentation. Two, one of my colleagues, Alex Ott, has several scripts that allows you to pause jobs. So let's take a look at the documentation. So again, a few more details about what this feature does. We're going to jump down into step one, deploying the actual ARM template to get this enabled. So as we mentioned, there's a few prerequisites, but one important one is that we've got to shut down any compute resources in your workspace. Well, I have the link to Alex Ott's scripts if you need to stop jobs, pause jobs, shut down your SQL warehouses and any other standard compute. You're going to need to do that before we actually deploy this ARM template. So I'm not going to keep popping back to the documentation, but just know it's here for you to follow through. But I'm going to walk you through the actual steps as we go through the video. So before we do that, I want to review a few of these requirements or prereqs that are in my existing cluster and workspace. So again, let's log into our Azure portal. If you haven't done that, please do so now if you're going to follow along. So I've logged into my Azure portal. We need to find our Azure Databricks workspace that we care about. So again, you could search for the Azure workspaces if you don't know what they are. I already have one in my recent history. So we're going to use this workspace to actually enable this feature today. So that brings us up to our overview page. A couple of things that I want to highlight here. One, we are on the premium plan, if you notice over here on the right. Number two, we have the public IP or no public IP enabled. That is yes. And we have a virtual network. So the first thing that you should notice, the virtual network is here on this page. If it is not here, we may have a managed Databricks network that is not going to work for this feature. The other thing that you can look for is if you click on settings, expand that, come on down to networking, right? If this networking tab is grayed out, again, that's a key that this is a managed network that will not be able to enable this feature. So on our network access, let's take a look at a few of the other features that we have enabled. One, we do have SCC enabled, so good, that meets our prerequisites, or no public IP. The allow public network access for me is enabled, which is if you disable it, that enables the front end private link. And required NSG rules, right, means I do have a back end private link. So your workspace may look differently, but just know that the key requirement is that SCC should be enabled or must be enabled, right? So we're gonna refer back to these pages as we go in our portal because we're gonna need a few of these settings or a reminder of what of these settings are as we go through the template. So that's good. Now let's go back to the overview page. A few things I want to point out as well is that the managed resource group, if you chose a custom name, I'm going to go ahead and copy that because I'm going to need to use this later. So a lot of customers will use the default setting, but I'm going to put this into a notepad on another screen because we're going to need this later. So again, managed resource name is important, so we're going to copy that. With that, let's click into our managed resource group. We need to look at our storage account. So again, if you've customized the name, other than default, this is important. We should probably make a note of that. So let's click on the storage account itself. And I do want to copy the name of this storage account. So I'm going to highlight this and again, put it in a notepad on another screen because we're going to need this later. Copy that. So again, here's our default storage account for the workspace. What I do like to point out here is if you open up security and networking, go ahead and expand that link if it's not already expanded and click on networking. This is what we're going to fix. Enabled from all networks is the default, as we mentioned in the first slide. And what we're going to do after we're done deploying this ARM template is this is going to be set for the second option here. We're going to enable the firewall support for the storage account. Okay, so let's come back to our main overview page. It all looks good so far. So again, we should check to make sure our clusters are not started. So let's go ahead and go into our actual Databricks workspace. And we're just going to do a couple of checks to make sure our warehouses aren't running, any standard compute is not running as well, and make sure there are no jobs. As I mentioned earlier, you can use some of Alex Ott, my colleague's scripts, to go ahead and disable or pause any of your jobs if you do have those. So the first thing I want to do is look for standard compute. I only have one all-purpose compute cluster. It is stopped. It is not running. And while I'm at this page, I can also check for jobs. I have no jobs. And I should also verify I have no SQL warehouses running. They are not. So everything is shut down in my workspace. We should be good to go. So I will pop back over to the documentation because I need to grab the ARM template. So basically we're down to step 4. I want to go ahead and grab the ARM template. So again, I'm going to open this up in another tab. And the simplest thing to do is just click copy on this. And then what I want to do is I'm going to duplicate this tab. I want to open up another Azure portal because we're going to refer back to our cluster settings, I should say workspace settings, as we go through this ARM template. So what I want to do now is do a quick find or deploy a custom template option. So I could quickly just search for deploy, and I'm going to go to deploy custom template. We're going to use the build your own template in the editor option. Delete what's currently here, and we're going to paste in the template that we had. Click save. Bring us to our next page where we're going to have to identify and set up a few different options. Sometimes the resource group is not pre-populated, but we recommend choosing the resource group where that VNet resides. So again, you're using a VNet injection, so that subnet, I should say that VNet is the, look for that resource group that VNet is in, and this is mine. That's where that VNet resides. Verify that our region matches, right? Obviously, our workspace and storage account need to be in the same region, and we need to grab the workspace name. So I did not grab that earlier, so let's go back to our portal for our workspace, and here is the name in the top left. You can also click on properties down there on the left, the navigation pane if you want to get to it, but you could also grab it right from up here. So we need the workspace name. Let's go back to our template, paste our workspace name in. The location, the default should work. Now, I mentioned earlier, my managed resource group name was not the default. If you've deployed workspaces allowing Databricks to generate this managed resource group name, then you don't need to change anything here. I made a change. So my managed resource group name is custom, so I need to grab that and copy that in here. Okay. Storage account name. Also, I've customized that. If you did not customize it and allow Databricks to create this storage account name, you don't need to change this. But as I mentioned earlier, I knew I made a custom name here, so I'm going to copy that in my clipboard from another page and change this up. Okay. We're going to need to read the VNet resource ID. Okay. Again, let's come back to our page. Let's click on our virtual network here. And again, you want to expand settings if it's not expanded already, and come on down to properties. So again, I want this resource ID here. If you notice, that's what needs to go into that template field. So I'm going to copy that, come back over to my template, and we're going to paste that in. We're also going to need our private subnet and public subnet names. So let's go back over here, back to the overview page, back to our workspace overview page. And I'm going to do a quick show more, and I'm going to grab them here. So this is our private. Come back over here. There's our private. We want our public next. Copy our public. Paste those in there. Access connector name, I'm going to leave the default. I'm going to allow the ARM template to generate this connector name for me. I want to leave the managed identity type as system assigned. And I want to, if I was going to change this for managed identity, then I would have to fill this in. I do not. And our main feature we're enabling here today is the storage account firewall. So that needs to be enabled. That's what we're actually setting after we fill in all of these various fields. We do have disable public IP as true, right? That is the SCC mode. We do have public network access enabled. If you remember when I looked at that, that was the front end private link, so that is correct. Now the required NSG rules is not correct. In my workspace, I have no Azure Databricks rules specified. And then we come down to a few encryption options. I do not have storage double encryption enabled, and I have not enabled customer managed keys. If you have customer managed keys enabled, this would obviously be set to enabled. You're going to need to grab information from your workspace about your customer key service vault ID and the disk key vault ID, and whether disk auto rotation is set true or false. And this, again, this is in your cluster. I should say your workspace overview page as you drill down into those. Okay. So quickly reviewing all these, I will point out though, if you needed to get a little more detail about each one of these settings in this ARM template without actually hovering over the icon, we can come back to our documentation here, and you can actually open up this ARM template fields. You may want to review this before you jump through and get on that ARM template. But again, this is, I should say more details about each one of these fields. All right. Okay, as I mentioned, you can review the more details about these fields. I feel comfortable that I've edited everything or filled in everything I need to. Let's go ahead and click review and create. At least it passed the validation stage. All looks good. Quick verification. These look like all of the values that we put in. Go ahead and hit create. That's going to initialize the deployment, submit it to Azure to get the deployment process going. This could take a minute. This could take 5 minutes. We are dependent upon the backbone, how quickly things are happening. Okay, with the magic of editing, I did not have you sit through the whole deployment process, but it took about a minute and a half for my deployment process. The deployment is complete. And if I go to the resource group, click this button here, a couple of things. We'll notice that, again, in our resource group there, I do have quite a few items in my resource group, but we now have a Databricks access connector and a few other things. If we take a look at that storage account before we start the cluster, again, let's go back to the managed resource group. So let's go back to our overview page for our cluster, right? And if I come back to the overview page and click on the managed resource group, again, the storage account is what we should have enabled is that firewall support. And if we come back into security and networking, click on networking tab, you notice now that we have enabled from selected virtual networks and IP addresses. The enable from all networks is no longer enabled. And we've added the necessary access connector here to access the storage account. Basically, that's what I'm trying to get at here. So that looks correct. What we need to do, though, is we need to finish the steps and create some private endpoints. So if we refer back to our documentation, step 2, right, once this deployment is complete, we just went through step 1. Step 2 is to create these private endpoints to the storage account. So we will need 2 private endpoints, one for DFS and one for blob. So again, we're going to go back to the user portal, navigate to our workspace, click our managed resource group, and under the resource, find our storage account, which we're already there, and we're going to click on the networking and create these private endpoints. So let's do that. So we're already at our storage account, as I said, right? Here's our storage account. We're going to click on the networking, and we're going to create some private endpoints. So click on the private endpoint here. We need to create 2 private endpoints. So let's click create a new private endpoint by the plus sign. Okay, so we click the create a private endpoint. Let's go ahead and fill in the details. So it may fill in the resource group to the MRG. Let's choose a different one. I've already had a chance to type this in, so you don't have to see me type. So I'm going to choose that one. Same thing for the name. I've already typed this in, so you don't have to see me do all the typing. And I choose, I should say we recommend some standard naming conventions like -DFS -PE for private endpoint. Ensure that it's in the same region. All good. Let's go to the next page. We're going to do 2 of these, as I mentioned. The first one is DFS, so we're going to pick our sub-resource type as DFS. Go ahead and click your virtual networking. Again, we want to choose our virtual network, right? Again, it is sitting in my resource group. And the subnet, it's defaulted to the private link. Remember, we mentioned you have to have a third subnet within that VNet. So we're going to use the private link one. I leave it dynamically allocated and go ahead and click next. And we do not have any application security groups. For the DNS, let's go ahead and leave the defaults. However, here's another gotcha. Here's that default resource group of the MRG. We can't use that because we don't have access to that. So pick, again, the resource group that your VNet is, or if you need to, a different one, but I prefer to keep it in that resource group. Go ahead and click next. I do have an owner tag that I assigned, so you don't have to see me type. Let's go ahead and do a review and create. Okay, validation passed. Let's go ahead and click create. And that private endpoint is now in the process of being deployed. As I mentioned, with the modern science of editing, I was able to get us right to the deploy is complete stage. So that first private endpoint is created. Let's go to the actual resource. We're going to go to resources. There's our private endpoint. All good. So we need to create one more endpoint, as we mentioned, on the storage account. So we could click here. Let's go back to that storage account. We're going to click on our networking link, right? Again, so expand security and networking, click on networking. Go to our private endpoint tab, click on that. So as we said, we have one private endpoint that was for DFS. We're going to create one more private endpoint for blob. So again, click private endpoint. The resource group this time did default to the MRG. We do not want that. So pick your standard resource group where the VNet is. And again, the name here will be, again, consistent. So I like to, as I said, be consistent. And this is going to be a blob private endpoint. So the last one was named DFS. This one's going to be blob. This is the correct region. Perfect. So let's go ahead and hit next. We just said that the sub-resource type is going to be blob. Go ahead and click this. Go to our virtual network page. Again, we need to choose the virtual network that our resource group is in. I should say the VNet that where our resource group is, and that's this one, and there's Scott Greer's resource group. The subnet, again, defaulted to the private link, as we said. As we did the previous endpoint, we cannot use the 2 other subnets that are in there, the public and private. Perfect, that's what we want. And again, leave it as dynamically allocated, no application security group. Go to their DNS page. And again, here's a little gotcha, right? It did default to the MRG. We cannot use that. So let's go ahead and pick the resource group where our VNet resides. Tags. We'll go ahead and I like my owner tag. And we'll go ahead and click review. Validation passed. Let's go ahead and click to create. Okay, our deployment is complete for that blob private endpoint. So again, let's click on the go to resources page and verify that it was created. It is. And if we go to the actual storage account, let's verify that these private endpoints were automatically approved. If not, we would just have to approve them manually. So again, storage should say security networking, opening up networking, click our private endpoint connections, and the connection state is approved. So good for us, they're approved. Otherwise, you would have to just manually approve those. One more thing to point out here, our documentation mentions serverless, right? So if you do have a network connectivity configuration or NCC applied to this workspace, it would automatically add the necessary firewall rules to this storage account. I do not have any NCCs assigned to this workspace, so I do not have any additional firewall rules, but just know that if it is already assigned to this workspace, this template will automatically assign those rules for you as well here. So your serverless and classic compute will work perfectly fine together. Okay, so we've gone through the templates very quickly, reviewed back our documentation. Right, so we went through step 2, we create all these private endpoints. We have a note on Cloud Fetch, right? We're not going to cover that in this video. However, if you are using Cloud Fetch, we do have some notes on here of when you should use it. And if so, you should probably create these 2 private endpoints as well. We just finalized step 4. We confirmed that these endpoints are approved. And we just mentioned that if you have a serverless warehouse with the NCC assigned to this workspace, they would automatically be applied. If you wanted to verify that, let me just go into the account console. Again, you need to be an account admin to get there. So I am. So let's go into our accounts and click on the cloud resources, or let's actually click on the workspace. So if I wanted to verify if this had a workspace, I should say an NCC assigned to it, let's go ahead and find the workspace that we just enabled. So I'm going to come in here. There is my workspace. If I were to click here, if I were to click on the update on the top right, you will notice I do not have an NCC assigned. But if you had an NCC assigned to this workspace, as I said, it would automatically apply those firewall rules to the new to the storage account for the workspace. You would be covered. So I just wanted to show you how to verify that. If you have any questions about that, again, you have to be an account admin in order to access this page to assign an NCC or do any configurations for the serverless networking. All right, so let's go back to our main overview page. And to finalize all this, we need to get into our actual Databricks service, to our workspace, come into our workspace URL, and we can start up a cluster and verify that it all works. Again, the start time can vary, but if I were to just click on standard compute and start up my cluster, we'll verify that it works. Okay, again, thanks to the power of editing, you do not have to wait for that cluster to start, but as you can see, the cluster did start successfully, which means it can obviously access the default workspace storage account. If you needed to do a few other tests against your workspace storage account, you could use DB utilities and verify that. But I know that as long as it started, it has access to the default storage account. Before we end, I just want to point out that if you needed to reverse these steps, right, for some reason it did not work, you had issues, you needed to disable the workspace storage firewall account, we would basically reverse the process. So I would just go ahead and open up that ARM template again, fill out the exact same permissions, and we would just hit false instead of enabled on that template. And that should disable your storage account and put it back to the default, allowing all public connections to access that. And that would be it. So again, thank you for your time. We were able to enable the default storage account for enable firewall support for your workspace storage account.